Just okay. So we have a comment. If I miss any comments, because there are a lot of, let's say, activities in the chat. If I miss anything, just feel free to retype it. Okay. We have a comment from Noor Alifa Ardianingrum. Once again, apologize if I pronounce the names badly. I used to work as an assessor for palm oil plantation, mostly auditing palm oil plantation owned by corporation, and even though they have corporate policy and local law to prevent child labor, we used to still fund this practice, and this is actually dilemmatic situation for the workers. So this is very much true, and this happens a lot. Palm oil, I think it's one of the subsectors which is extremely affected by many issues related to decent work, to workers' rights, but it also happens elsewhere. And this comment is very, let's say, well taken, because like I was saying before, very often now big players in the private sector realize that they need to do something about child labor. However, in some cases, it boils down to protecting their image and putting, let's say, strategies and plans in place, which sometimes reveal to be just lip service. It is very important to address root causes. If, for example, an enterprise operating in palm oil sector is not providing decent job for people in this particular community, maybe deprive community of their lands, or provide very low wages, then it is very likely that people will actually draw their children into child labor, not because they are bad people, but simply because they have no choice. So prohibiting child labor is not always, well, of course it's a first step, but we cannot stop there, because it will be then just an empty measure. We have to make sure that on the ground there are other measures in place to make sure that children are not there, to make sure that, for example, there are care facilities for mothers, so they don't have to take along the younger children into the fields. And there are many other measures to make this, let's say, ban of child labor effective, beyond just putting in place conduct codes. Okay, then we have another question from Nor about if we have any best practice in preventing child labor. This is a very ambitious question, and I'm not sure if we can say that that one practice, one measure can do anything, because it is an extremely complex phenomenon, and it has a lot of underlying causes. So applying just one measure, I think, will never be effective. What I would say that like the most maybe important set of measures would be sensitizing people and developing their capacities, but also reducing rural poverty, because most of the causes of child labor are somehow related to poverty, be it low income of poverty, and also in general of decent work aspects. Because, for example, if a family has a very low income, they will not be able to keep the children in school. They will not be able to, let's say, to protect the children from child labor. If, for example, a mother doesn't have where to leave children, or for example, she has to work. Very often, women has to work a lot. They have to engage in reproductive and productive work, and they have literally no time to take care of the house, so they may ask their children to do so. They have no means to, for example, hire workers, so they will ask their children to do so. Of course, it's just an example, but I think that sensitizing sensitizing rural people and people who work in agriculture, as well as providing solutions to rural poverty and to decent work deficits, is one of the fundamental means in addressing child labor. Okay, now I hope it answered more or less. Then Wilhelm Okoko, shall we get the slides at the end of the presentation? Yes, of course. For all those who registered, we'll share the slides, the recording, and then of course you're invited also to share it further with your colleagues. For those who have not registered, you have still chance to do it. We'll not close the registration form because it's mostly, let's say, to keep in touch. It's not to, let's say, to check on who attended or not. Um, then another question from Nor, or a comment maybe. When we are dealing with private sector, it is challenging to convince them as they found it as cheap labor. Yes, exactly. It is very challenging because very often children are not even paid or are paid much, much less than adult workers. And even worse, if on the labor market we have a competition of adult workers and children, then it drives also down the adult workers' wages, who very often are forced to accept really unacceptable wages. Also, children are less skilled, they have less experience, even life experience, so they are less likely to stand up for their rights, to speak up. And that is why for some employers, it can be very attractive, as I was saying. It is very difficult to, let's say, to convince private sector that it works, that it is different, because the benefit of of reducing child labor are more visible in long term, because of course it's more convenient today to pay less to a child than getting productivity increase, let's say, after some time. But it's very much true. Like, we cannot have a high productivity, we cannot have an innovative enterprises if we rely on work of exploited unskilled children. uh, and also now enterprises are very much realizing that they will not have access to certain markets. People may boycott them if they don't do something with child labor. Another issue is that very often a big enterprise which is present on international market can, let's say, work against child labor in agriculture, but their suppliers may not necessarily. So it is also very important to stress that the control along the supply chain should be also very rigid. Okay. Another question from William. Ending child labor is a very sensitive subject in countries where it is identified because child labor is not defined in the same. In some culture, child labor as identified here is educating a child to be a great person once old. My question, how might we closely work with rural families to encourage them to manage child education and enjoyment while the child can help for work? This is also a very important point that you are raising. And it is an argument that we meet very often, but I think that what we try always to stress that it is normal for child to participate in many activities, and I think probably most of the children do. Also in developed countries, I was also helping out when I was child, my parents. So it is absolutely normal, and in fact, even related conventions like they acknowledge that at different point of time, at different point of child's development, a child can be more and more involved in certain type of activities. So, for example, some countries allow light work, which can start from 12, 13 years old, which is work which is still, let's say, allows education, which is not harmful, and it can be done for several hours per week, but can still be a source of income and also a source of, let's say, skills development for a child. Then the minimum age for employment in some countries and allowed by related ILO convention is 14, 15 years old. So we are still under 18, but we acknowledge that in some situation, although it may be ideal to keep children in schools, but in some situation they need to work and they are mature enough to perform some kind of work which is not hazardous, which is very important to stress. However, we have to keep in mind that what we call child labor is a work which is harmful. And I think that it is for some people, it is a little bit difficult maybe to distinguish between what is acceptable and unacceptable because they are not aware of risks. They are not aware of the impact that it may have on children. Because, for example, as I was saying before, some bad consequences, especially on health, but not only, can result only after the years. That is why children with the best intentions, they still make their sons and daughters perform these tasks because they just simply don't know that it is hazardous. So I think that raising awareness and really explaining with a respectful way and adapted to the culture is a key. And another important thing is that there is also, in some situations, that can be also a feeling of shame because uh, some people may know that it is not appropriate, but they are just so poor that they have to rely on this. So you have to also really shape and tailor our arguments and our, let's say, discussion around that to be culture sensitive, but also to understand what are the causes and that it shouldn't be always stigmatized because people, let's say, parents of children who are child laborers and not necessarily people who want them to work. So we have to really keep it in mind when talking to communities. Now there's another question, still from Wilhelm Okoko. How can individuals and organizations work with FAO to sensitize child labor in agriculture? And what are the alternatives you can propose to families and grassroots? How you can work? So the good thing about FAO that is it has a very decentralized structure, and country offices are present in most countries, and Africa is very well covered, for example. So we can always start to try, let's say, to trigger a collaboration with them, but also one of, let's say, of the ways of working together, for example, is this webinar, because we produce a lot of tools, but we want actually you to use these tools and to stay in touch so that we are able, even if there is no concrete project in place that we, let's say, carry out together, but that we can still in touch, exchange good practices, learn from each other, and see also what is your experience on the ground, for example, in this particular country. And we are also very happy to technically backstop. Regarding the alternatives, well, there are many, and I think that there's no no alternative which I would pick as the best one or as the one which can, let's say, solve issue on its own. But for sure, I think there are many simple way of, let's say, of that families could adapt within their modest means. There are very simple labor-saving technologies and practices, which then can vary from sector and from activity to activity. But for example, even irrigation systems or introducing of trolleys, for example, of many other things which can avoid that children, for example, carry heavy loads and have to walk long distances. We can also introduce more social protection measures, for example, school feeding. So people have an incentive to send children to school. But I think it is important to work together and to constantly exchange good practices because they are very much context specific, and so there's no one solution fits all. And then we have a question from Bernard Ravelosoana. Apart from can I advise someone else to take the FAO e-learning? What is the process? I'm not sure if I understood well the question, but you can advise anyone to take the e-learning. It's already there. It is available. So like I said, you can just type in FAO e-learning center or go to FAO thematic page on child labor. You can type it in Google. It will be one of the first results. You can register and it's free of charge. You can download it and then share it on pen drive. And I think it's very relevant for all people in FAO country offices, Ministry of staff of Ministers of Agriculture, but also NGOs, communities, and sometimes it does not require a sophisticated technology because most of the people nowadays have some kind of computer and they can use this course. They don't have to have access to internet. So then you can also, for example, advise if you see that if you work with a national statistician um, statistical institute, you can, for example, point them only to the unit 3, which is on generating knowledge, because of course for them it would be a little bit useless to go through a quite a longish course. But you can also advise people how they can take the course. And then we have another question from Wilhelm Okoko. Besides child working, pesticides in agriculture, what are the next areas FAO, national governments, and local organizations can work to end child labor? Okay, so there are many areas, and pesticides is just one of many. We know that pesticides can be applied not only in crop production, but it is also present in forestry, in also in other sectors. What we are, let's say, we as FAO, we work very closely also with forestry, with fisheries, to address specific issues of these sectors. Um, but in general, other areas like going, let's say, beyond sector perspective, other areas which are cross-cutting are, for example, gender. We have done, it was internal for FAO, a webinar on gender aspects of child labor, and I will be happy to share with all of you the link there to the recording from this webinar as well, because boys and girls can be affected in different ways, and very often boys and girls require different solutions to, let's say, withdraw them from child labor. Another area which is very important, and FAO is, let's say, trying to engage as much as possible in this area, is the 15 to 17 age group, which, like I mentioned, is a specific group because they are still considered children. They are under 18 years old. But in some countries, in many countries, they are already above the minimum age for employment, which is usually often set at 14, 15 years old. So they can work. They cannot do hazardous work. But very often then they face many barriers, for example, legal barriers. Maybe they cannot sign a contract or open a bank account because they are less than 18 years old. Maybe employers don't want to hire them because it is not clear whether they can work or not, what type of work they can engage in or not. So many employers will not hire them, but these people still need to work because, for example, there's no opportunity for schooling and they have to maintain themselves and very often their families. And then they are vulnerable because may end up in informal and precarious employment and sometimes also be exploited. So this is also an area where we try to generate knowledge, and also we are having now a project in Uganda, Mali, in Africa, and beyond Africa, also in Cambodia and Lebanon, to try to facilitate access of these people to decent employment opportunities which are not hazardous, but also the opportunities to access skills and apprenticeship. Another area which is also very important, it's conflict, because we know that unfortunately nowadays we have many conflicts. Also in Africa there are many, and it has a great impact on incidence of child labor, as I said before. But also there are certain, let's say, specific actions which you can take. It's not a development context when you can think in long term. These are the actions where very often it's an emergency context. The staff operating there is emergency staff, so also procedures are different. And yet child labor is very present and is increasing. Also, we have child labor among refugees, child labor in the conflict zone, also child labor, children which are also recruited to be child soldiers. So we have to have procedures and guidance in place so that emergency staff in emergency situation which don't, let's say, allow to plan and design complex programs, but they still can address the issue. And then I mean that there are many other areas of work. I think I'm just mentioning the ones that we are currently very much engaged in, but it doesn't mean that that there are no other areas. And it would be also great to hear from you. For example, now in the chat, if you, for example, have experience or particular area of work which you are already engaged in with regards to child labor, or which you think that may be important. So please feel free also to type in any idea that you may have. Now another comment from Bernard is, I think that one way to avoid child labor is helping their parents to have an income generating activity or professional project to take care of their children. This is absolutely crucial, Bernard. You're absolutely right. Very often, as we were saying, people who just are poor and they have to rely on their children. So if they have a source of income, they will not only be able not to ask the children to work, but even maybe to send children to school, maybe even invest in health checkups, for example, additional skills development opportunity for their children if they have older children. And it has also a great impact on girls, particularly because girls tend to be withdrawn first from school if there's, let's say, the income issue. So the more people let's say the better income people get, the less risk for children is to end up in child labor. However, just a little addition, we have to be careful because in some cases, like in project providing income generating opportunities for people have to be also designed in a certain way. Because, for example, we have public work schemes or some labor intensive crops, which, for example, create job opportunities, but in some cases they may increase demand for labor which a community is not able to meet, and therefore children may be called to work. Similarly, in case of women, if we don't provide care facilities and if we don't, let's say, advocate for more equal distribution of household tasks, then it is very risky that a woman who is provided with a income generating activity will end up being so busy that she'll have to rely on her children, not because of the poverty in this case, but because simply she will not be able to do all the tasks that, let's say, are required from her. That is why any program, any intervention should be really designed in a way that it really provides the benefits and not unintentionally increase child labor. Okay, I think these are all the questions. I'm not sure if, I hope I have not missed any. If I did, please, yes, I think if I missed any, just please type it again. If not, I will be very happy to share with you the recording of this session. Once again, please do register. I think my colleague Timbani pasted the link, yes, to the registration form. It now appears in your chat window. So if you have not registered, please do, so we can share with you the recording of this session, the links to the e-learning courses and other publications that we mentioned. We will also share with you a very short survey so we can evaluate the usefulness of this webinar. And I think it's also useful to share the recording from the gender webinar. It was for FAO audience, but let's say the topic, the themes treated were very, I think, of general interest. And we'll also notify you, if you have your emails, we'll also notify you about upcoming webinars and also when a French version of the e-learning course is ready. As I said, it should be very soon, probably early next week. So it would be great if we can keep in touch and exchange. And then, of course, you can also use this contact to stay in touch with us and to share your experience and good practices that you may have, or ask our questions, for example. So I think we are coming to an end of this webinar. I hope that it wasn't too overwhelming. I hope it could be useful for you. We'll also send the presentation, and I just wanted to mention that now on this last slide you can see also the links to our web pages. Yes, and the next webinar is, for now, it is almost confirmed that it will take place on the 14th of December, so in less than a month. It will be, as I said before, on the challenge of creating more and better jobs for rural youth. It will be done also in collaboration with NEPAD. We'll also have a NEPAD speaker, so it's a great pleasure for us to be able to exchange with them. And okay, I think we have another question. Okay, no, sorry. It's looking to work with FAO for sustainable projects in Congo. Yes, it will be a great it will be great if you could collaborate. And for sure, like, please stay in touch. Please stay, let's say, with our radar so we can notify you if we have any event and webinar. And please do use our tools. They are all free of charge, and they are produced actually to be used by you. So thank you so much for your participation and for so many questions and interesting comments. I hope that I was able to address most of them. And yes, and we'll be in touch. Thank you a lot to everyone again, and have a